I'm going to show you just how close this race was. So, Trump won, before I get to the maps here, Trump won because of the votes of 0.09% of the country. This is shared by Jake Werner here. I'll get to the specifics of each state, but Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin ended up being so close that Harris might well have won the election if she had leaned into Walz-style populism instead of Cheney-style conservatism. So I discussed a lot of that in my initial breakdown. I'm not going to go deep into that again, but clearly campaigning with Liz Cheney did nothing. In fact, Harris lost support among Republicans compared to 2020. This idea, again, I'm going to go, I don't want to get back into a rant, but they clearly sidelined Tim Walz when the first few weeks there was all this energy and he was a fantastic pick for VP, and then they simply neutered him, and he was not able to be the populist person that he is and why he was so successful in his state. But let me just break down the numbers here, because this gets to a greater discussion about what needs to be done. So Wisconsin, we are talking about here 49.7% for Trump to Kamala Harris at 48.8%. That's a difference of about 30,000 votes. Wisconsin had a 73% turnout, which is good, really good for the state, but we're still talking almost 30% of people who didn't vote. Moving over to Michigan, 49.7% of the vote for Trump to Kamala Harris at 48.3%. That's a difference of about 82,000 votes. And specifically in Detroit, only 47.2% of registered voters in Detroit voted. That's well below expectations. That is an area where Harris should have seen a massive support if she had campaigned properly, specifically as it pertains to issues such as Gaza, which of course Harris was afraid to even touch. And when she mentioned it, it was the same canned response. And by the way, I'm sure, many of you that follow us closely already know this, but Rashida Tlaib won her district overwhelmingly, while Harris actually lost it. Again, going to the issue here with Harris's inability to separate herself from Joe Biden on that particular issue. Moving over to Pennsylvania, the separation here. So Trump at 51% of the vote to Kamala Harris at 49% of the vote. The separation there is about 130,000 votes, so a wider gap there. Only 42% of young voters aged 18 to 29 voted in Pennsylvania, and 63.35% of registered voters in Philly, which is below expectations. And again, Philly was supposed to be a big turnout for her. Below expectations in Philadelphia. Now, this is all to say, again, Trump won over these three states. These three states, if Kamala Harris won, she would have won the election. Trump won again by 0.09% of the voting population. He won because of less than a 0.1% of the vote is the reason why he won. It is insane, insanely close. Now, some will take this and think, well, that means just bad luck. Democrats don't have to change anything. Just, next time, work a little harder on the same message and everything's fine. No, I don't think most people think that, but I do know that Democratic consultants, the ones that were paid to use the same strategy that lost them the election in 2016, think that. The ones that want to continue getting paid, doing the same garbage they always do, they think that nothing needs to change. Clearly here, this election should have never been close at all. This is partly why this time it is, you could argue, more stunning than in 2016. Because you would think, at this point, people have learned their lesson. They saw Trump for 4 years. They saw the impact of his presidency, not just in terms of policy and their lives, but culturally. But they decided after seeing that to bring him back in. The reason for this is the focus that the Democratic Party has had and the Harris campaign had on courting Republican voters that have no interest in voting for them. A lot of the discussion you're seeing online or on cable news right now is about, oh, if only Democrats were even further right wing, then they could have won. Why would a conservative voter vote for the Democratic Party when they have a conservative party to vote for? Or, I mean, at this point, not even conservative, far right party. The Democratic Party right now is a conservative party already. The idea that moving further right wing is somehow going to win over people who are right wing is insane. I don't know how many times you have to lose elections to learn this. Now, worth noting, a lot of people purposely don't want to learn this because their lives, their jobs depend on not learning this. This idea that the party's going to learn this time, why would they? The people currently in charge and the way the party operates, why would they learn? All they care about is their own positions, their own jobs. Moving the party into one that is a true working class party, a true anti-corporate power party, is antithetical to what the Democratic Party currently is. Now, of course, yes, the Republican Party is even further in that direction, much more corporate, much more pro-billionaire. But they work on cultural issues. They work on reactionary content. And that works on enough people, and they have created a cult out of that. And enough people swinging over to win them the election. There are all these people who simply do not vote. I showed you the numbers. If enough of those people were spoken to, were given a message, and there was a real investment by the Democratic Party into people's lives, and not just in swing states, but across the country. We've heard story after story of just there is zero infrastructure at all of the Democratic Party in states like Alabama, Missouri, Arkansas. You have to be willing to invest in places where there is no support, no one there to be able to build something on a national scale. So this isn't just an issue with the Kamala Harris campaign and her inability or unwillingness to truly separate herself from Joe Biden. This is also an issue with the party generally. And this gets to the Bernie Sanders letter, which if you've already read this, then you can skip this part and get to the next section of the video. But let me read through this because I think this is really worth noting here. He says it should come as no great surprise that a Democratic Party which has abandoned working class people would find that the working class has abandoned them. First, it was the white working class, and now it is Latino and black workers as well. While the Democratic leadership defends the status quo, the American people are angry and want change, and they're right. Today, while the very rich are doing phenomenally well, 60% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, and we have more income and wealth inequality than ever before. Unbelievably, real inflation accounted for weekly wages for the average American worker are actually lower now than they were 50 years ago. Today, despite an explosion in technology and worker productivity, many young people will have a worse standard of living than their parents, and many of them worry that artificial intelligence and robotics will make a bad situation even worse. Today, despite spending far more per capita than other countries, we remain the only wealthy nation not to guarantee healthcare to all as a human right, and we pay by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. We, alone among major countries, cannot even guarantee paid family and medical leave. Today, despite strong opposition from a majority of Americans, we continue to spend billions funding the extremist Netanyahu government's all-out war against the Palestinian people, which has led to the horrific humanitarian disaster of mass malnutrition and the starvation of thousands of children. Will the big money interests and well-paid consultants who control the Democratic Party learn any real lessons from this disastrous campaign? Will they understand the pain and political alienation that tens of millions of Americans are experiencing? Do they have any ideas as to how we can take on the increasingly powerful oligarchy, which has so much economic and political power? Probably not. In the coming weeks and months, those of us concerned about grassroots democracy and economic justice need to have some very serious political discussions. Stay tuned. The thing that I am very curious about is the stay tuned. What does that mean? It sounds like he has some idea, some plan of what to do now. And this gets to the heart of the issue here, which is we know what the problem is. We have seen this sort of loss before. We are already seeing the excuses from the Democratic consultants, from the same media that have been espousing this idea that Democrats need to be more right wing, and they keep arguing that every time they lose, and then they just keep losing again and again. We are not seeing change. So, what is the plan here from Bernie or whoever else to try and create that change within the party? Because a lot of people are thinking, hey, well, does this mean a third party? The current makeup of the system makes that incredibly tough. Is it possible? In a world where it's led by someone as popular as Bernie Sanders, maybe. But very unlikely, again, because of the infrastructure needed state by state to have some actual fight there. It is, I'll put it this way, it's much easier, as hard as it is, it's much easier to change the Democratic Party than it is to win with a third party in the current political system of first past the post that exists in the US. That's the reality of it. But still, he's got something planned here. So I want to know what that is. But this gets to, actually, it's worth sharing this as well. Bernie Sanders, among independent voters, has the highest numbers, the highest favorability. So, even doesn't sound great, but a lot of people have negative opinions of politicians just generally. But he's the highest among anybody on the ticket. So, including people like Elon Musk, which I can't believe he's as high. But Bernie has higher favorables than Elon Musk, J.D. Vance, Tim Walz, Kamala Harris, Liz Cheney, Trump, and Biden. Something can be done. Change can happen. There has to be a real investment there. And I think it's possible with the right people in charge. But that involves pulling power away from the people that have money, and that is the hardest part. Because the right works on culture issues, works on just mass BS across a wide scale. But again, they don't focus on working class solutions for anybody. They work on dismantling any power that the working class actually has, and amassing it within the top, within corporations. Cutting corporate tax rates is one of the first things that Trump plans to do. They're already too low. That's not going to lead to any kind of economic prosperity for the vast majority of people. But that's how they have won, is just through this mass delusion around cultural issues that is, you're never going to get the Democratic Party to win based on that, because the people that are voting because of that are already voting for the Republicans. You have to have a separate, different message than they do that is clearly separate from them. Speaking on, people's fears around immigration, for example. Again, you are capitulating to right-wing framing of people that are, in the vast majority, going to vote for Republicans if that is their number one issue. You have to have a separate message. And this is, we're 4 years away from any potential election. And I say potential because I don't know what Trump administration is going to be like. I don't know what democracy is going to look like in 4 years. But if there's any hope for some real change and the working class amassing some power, it has to start from the ground up. But it helps if it's aided by people at the top, like a Bernie Sanders.